This presentation will be broken down into 5 parts. First, we will briefly introduce Cholas and explain why we are studying it. Secondly, we will differentiate Cholos and Cholas and how intersectionality is involved within the Latino American girl gangs and concentrated disadvantage within their communities. Next, we will explain a relation to doing gender. This section in particular will cover multiple aspects. Our last segment will demonstrate the gang operations, followed by our conclusion to the research. Before we dive into anything, I will briefly introduce the topic. Since the early 1900s, Latino American girl gangs have been resided within the streets of LA. My colleagues, Karan, Alvin, and I are researchers from SOC365 presenting our case study analysis on Cholas, the Latino American girl gangs, and implying and incorporating our research to various theories in criminology and gender studies. Intersectionality, Cholo versus Cholas. This section will incorporate intersectionality through our class discussion and readings. Most of these gangs would place dominance on the males, so the female gangs were more seen as associates of the males. The women would be very rarely involved with high crime activity, but would still follow through on gang operations and meetings. In the gang world, women were the minority, and a hierarchy would differentiate which cholos were more superior than others. This hierarchical pyramid explains the girls that would be used for only sexual pleasures were at the bottom. Next would be the girls they would bring to parties or casual hookups. On top of those girls, it would be the girls that were strictly there for substance abuse. And lastly, the true cholas, who were actually involved with crime activity, were at the top of their status. Each woman had a role, and their role would decide their status and reliability within the gang. Theorizing intersectionality. Through our case study analysis, we found that in almost all of our Latino American gangs, they were located in impoverished neighborhoods. These neighborhoods would be run down and included families with low socioeconomic status. The individuals would perceive police to be against them because of their race and identity, which is why they would resort to gangs for protection. For Cholas, this placed them into inferior roles because of their gender and low class status. As women were looking for status and gaining economic independence, they became vulnerable within the gang, and the men used them for sexual and violent victimizations. Class, race, and gender all conflicted together to place unique disadvantages on the girls in dislocated communities, as demonstrated by Irwin and Alder. Other than gender inequalities, they experienced racial, political, and class alienation growing up in distressed communities as women. Concentrated disadvantage. To quickly define concentrated disadvantage, these are communities with high percentage of low-class members. These areas would constantly be involved with high crime activity, and with low socioeconomic status, the individuals would resort to gang life as a means of providing for themselves and their family. Statistics prove that these communities would consist of people of color and were more likely to have negative opinions towards law enforcement.
Doing gender. Following our discussion of intersectionality and the role of concentrated disadvantage, it's quite interesting to see that not many Mexican American females identify as a chola. If we look at the most prevalent statistical data on male and female gang distribution, we can see that 82% of men between the ages of 18 to 25 in Southwest Los Angeles identify as a gang member in comparison to only 18% of females. This is actually quite surprising because if we control for the difference in gender and assume for the sake of argument the majority of the gang participants come from similar situations of poverty, violence, or neglect, then it begs the question against the evident gender gap in participation. Although if we specifically look at the females that identify as a chola, we come to learn that majority of the female participants hold an inferior position in gangs. In other words, majority of the females serve as companions to male counterparts of the gang, and their primary purpose in the gang is to look sexually appealing in order to facilitate the masculinity status of men. Good girls versus bad girls. If we turn to the question of why girls identify as cholas, we see that societal structures, culture, and situational disadvantages play a dominant role in one's decision of becoming a gang member or retaining their femininity status. We can analyze the differences in decisions by using Nikki Jones's work on African American girls and inner city violence. In the text, we see how the good girls were framed as following the mainstream norms associated with their gender, as they abided to the cultural norms and avoided physical confrontation, whereas the fighting girls defined the feminine girls as weak and rationalized their ability to engage in fights as an avenue for securing their freedom of mobility on the streets. If we use this context to the Chola girls, we see that Chiquitas usually come from traditional Mexican households and most abide to the norms associated with femininity as they have an influence of adult supervision. On the other hand, the Chola girls come from troubling backgrounds and majority tend to reject the gendered associations with femininity as most lack adult supervision and rationalize their participation in street gangs as an avenue for emotional support. When we closely analyze the defining characteristics of a Chola girl, we come across unanimous characteristics of rejecting femininity, as many girls tend to retain a rebellious attitude where traditional gender norms are rejected for the attainment of freedom. Many girls also tend to revitalize their identity and demeanor of interacting in society to escape the cultural and social limitations associated with their gender as a female, specifically in areas of concentrated disadvantage. This is similar to Miller's study on gang involvement amongst young girls, as rejecting femininity was seen as a method of resisting the limitations placed by society on the female gender, and the gang culture being referenced as an escape from societal pressures. In relation to gender crossing, it's important to understand that it's easier for women to engage in more masculine behavior in comparison to men engaging in more feminine behavior, as the current research showcases that a Chola's masculinity status defines their membership within a gang, as most gang members hold homophobic attitudes against sexual minorities. Gang membership for Cholas is often through the male counterpart, as usually a spouse or intimate partner is a member of a local community gang, and the female automatically becomes a member through gang affiliation. Gender crossing is engaged by girls having the desire to internalize the values of the gang. This includes the ability to fight, facing the enemy, and being able to present a tough demeanor, whether that's through physical appeal or engagement in hard drugs. The key method of becoming a chola is internalizing the physical identification with the gang, which includes dressing like a male cholo with baggy clothing, body tattoos, and representation of gang colors. Sociologist Norma Mendoza Denton conducted an interesting study on cholo girls where she examined these girls' use of makeup and its meaning in the gang culture. She discovered that the girls used distinctive makeup techniques to serve two purposes. The first reason was to identify oneself as different from the normal girls. This idea of attracting attention and defining oneself as unique by rejecting the norms associated with appropriate femininity. The second reason was to create an intimidating image, where other girls would be afraid of physical confrontation. This is expressed in the Cholo girls' use of eyeliner, dark lipstick tones, and heavy use of mascara to purposely look frightening. The following is a generic diagram explaining the life of a Chola girl. It does not represent every girl's experience, but showcases the difficulties one experiences in their lives over time that could lead to becoming a Chola girl. We can argue that traumatic childhood experiences, early victimization in terms of sexual assault, and introductions of gangs through peer influence are primary factors why one might choose to become a Chola girl. We can also see that these girls experience very little resistance in terms of leaving the gang, and their primary reason for leaving the gang is for family settlement. Situated survival strategy. Here we see that the gang not only serves as an avenue for emotional support, but also serves as a method of protection. In some essence, we can argue that the traumatic experiences of these girls forced them to adopt the lifestyle of a chola. Many of the girls also witness victimization in their own household amongst families and friends. These experiences serve as motivation for affiliating with a gang, which is constant with the discovery in Miller's study, as most girls choose to affiliate with a gang to further prevent victimization.
So in this slide, I'm going to talk about the street code of Cholas. The street code of Chola is mainly about being true and loyal to the group that they belong in. In other words, the ability and willingness to fight, facing the enemy, not running away, to be bad, doing crazy stuffs, to be tough, and to use drugs are all prized behaviors. Girls who exhibit these qualities are most desired as gang members. So these street codes differentiate them from those fake cholas and gain respect within the gang family. Moreover, the peer influence plays a huge part in the Chola's culture because most of these street codes require the peer approval and keep reminding them of what they should do and what they should not. A great example of the peer influence within the Chola gang is the control on the people who they should hang out with and who they should not. So this is as known as the girl code. So for example, they should not hang out with the girls' exes, the girls outside of the family that they do not like. So for the nature of crime, most of the Chola's crime are not violent. One of the most frequent crime that Cholas got involved is the drug using and drug trafficking because drugs are often used in Chola's social gathering such as marijuana, inhalants, and cocaine. Moreover, according to our research article, female adolescent crimes are most likely than those of the males to be motivated by interpersonal disputes rather than material gains, which means the motive of crime are usually peer influence driven. Female adolescents are also more likely to be victimized by interpersonal and intimate violence such as rape, childhood sexual abuse, and aggravated assault. Negative outcomes refer to these consequences such as pregnancy, violent victimization, sexual assault, and drug abuse. So as a result, Mexican American adolescents have the highest birth rate in America. The US born Hispanic adolescents have almost double the birth rates of non US born Hispanics. In San Antonio, Mexican Americans have one of the most highest teenage pregnancy rates in United States.
In terms of future research outlooks, the current academic research lacks in explaining the gang exiting procedures for Cholas. It would be interesting to engage in an interview study to examine the challenges Cholas experience after exiting the gang.